Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another edition of Mere Tradition. I'm your host, Kennedy Hall, and I'm here with my friend Stephen Jonathan, who is an expert in all things education. He's a Catholic educator. He's been involved in education in various milieu. Perhaps you've seen him on some other Catholic programs. He's been on some before, which is where I first saw him. And we could say he's a classicist. He's a man who understands the church's wisdom on how the mind is formed and what that really means to be educated. And we're going to talk about that today, but I'll let him introduce himself and fill in the blanks. And Stephen, thanks for coming on.
Kenny, thanks for having me. It's good to be here. I've known about you for a while for the same reason. I've seen you on a few shows. I'm really happy you're out there doing what you're doing. I've been a public educator and a Catholic teacher for over 33 years. And my very first year of teaching, I was a secular humanist and atheist. And I realized my first year that I was in the wrong place, doing the wrong job, because I always hated my own schooling. I just ended up there by default. And then God spoke to me in an instant. This weirdest thing happened. I was so frustrated. And God infused understanding into my soul about the value of human persons, the fact that their human soul was worth more than the entire material universe if it were to be sanctified. Somehow I got that message. And then and there in 1991, I went on a quest to discover what was wrong with modern education and to recover what an authentic education is. And that led me all over the world. And so that's basically my story in a nutshell. And I've arrived here today with a decent understanding of what an education actually is supposed to be. And it's diametrically opposite from what we see in our public schools all over the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, our backgrounds are, in a sense, a little bit similar. I was baptized Catholic. I've said this 1,000 times. I won't bore my audience with the details, but nominally so. My mother's an Italian immigrant, culturally Catholic, but not a lot going on. And so I tried to be an atheist. I tried my hardest, God forgive me. I could never really fully commit. There was just some nostalgia I had from all the sort of Italian things growing up, the crucifixes and the Virgin Mary statues. Every time I would think I was an atheist, I would see a priest walking down the street and feel really guilty, but not in a bad way, in a way of like shame, in the sense of what's the virtue? Compunction. Like it was kind of like that. It was like, ooh, I probably shouldn't be an atheist. You know, I kind of had this feeling, but I was really close. And I actually loved education. I loved the idea of being a teacher. I wanted to be a teacher my whole life, since pretty much as long as I can remember wanting to do a job, a career. So I did it intentionally. And, but I was really kind of, when I look back at the state of my intellectual mindset going into education, when I finally started teaching when I was 24, 25, I was basically a classic liberal. You know, I was convinced that the Canadian, Commonwealth understanding of citizenry and all these kinds of things was the way forward, and this is what we should inculcate in our students and things. I wasn't really a leftist, but I was definitely like a liberal in a sense. And but then I had a major conversion, another story for another day, and really it was a heartfelt thing. I was in Guadalupe, and it was very Marian, and it was all that, and it was my discovery of the real true doctrine of the church, where implicitly everything just necessarily started to change. And then I was teaching religion classes in a high school for 5 years. And I had this progression where I realized not only was the doctrine in the classes and the curriculum wonky, but the method of teaching the students was off. And then I eventually had to get out of education. We were talking a bit before it came on the air. I'm in Canada, and things got kind of screwy during COVID, formerly pronounced communism. And so I found another way, but education is my first love. So I'm happy to share that kind of common origin with you.
Yeah, we really do share it, coming from that liberal bent and into the church. And when God first spoke to me in 91, it took me till 2008 to join Holy Mother Church, to become united with the body of Christ. But for me, it began with that initial locution, and then I actually began with the fairy tales and the Greek myths, and noticed the difference between the impact on my students between that and the dreadful textbooks. I noticed early on, and I could say this about almost all public schools, is that kids end up in what I call an educational coma. And that's an appropriate response to modern pedagogy. That's an appropriate response to everything that we have to recover that's wrong with modern education. So I share that with you, and I'm a slow learner compared to you because it took me that 91 to 2008 to read my way into the church and for God to soften my hard head and my harder heart. So I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so great. My heart's on fire for Christ, and mine also was very Marian and beautiful. And it was the one tradition I wouldn't come into. I was like, I'll be religious, God, anywhere but the Catholic Church. And it was out of my hands by 2006, 2007. It was out of my hands. So
That's awesome. That's like St. Augustine says, Lord, make me chaste, but not yet. You're saying, Lord, make me religious, but not Catholic.
exactly. Horrendously. And that's my patron saint for 1,000 good reasons. And Augustine has taught me so much about education. He's a great source.
Well, he's my patron saint as well. I'm a member of the Third Order, and my Third Order name is Augustine. So Confessions was St. Augustine's Confessions was the book that completely. I remember it was Augustine and Aquinas, of course, but I remember reading something in Confessions, and I started to laugh, and I just started to laugh like a belly laugh with tears because I looked around and I said, oh my goodness, I didn't even know what reality was the whole flipping time. It was just, everything changed. So I love Augustine.
Thank me, starting with Confessions. And maybe I can begin with a quote from The City of God.
Sure.
One of my books, worth reading. It's huge, but I've read it several times just because it's so enchanting and brilliant, and it just covers so many things. But the title City of God is probably the first necessary thing we have to talk about if we're going to have an authentic conversation on education, because as Augustine explains about the title, he says there are two loves, and those two loves form two cities. There's love of God to the contempt of self, and that forms a city of God. Then there's the love of self to the contempt of God, and that forms the city of man. Anything we talk about, Kennedy, that has to do with an authentic education, if you are a citizen in the city of man and you have contempt for God and elevate yourself above it, it will be completely unintelligible. I've talked to thousands of people, and if you're a citizen in the city of man, there's no reason to even really have a conversation about education. It requires us to remember to know that God created the universe, that God is the eternal lawmaker. And only under that understanding as a citizen in the city of God, or at least an aspiring one, where we give assent to God, that's the only way an honest conversation on education makes sense. That's super vital.
Yes, and the city of God versus the city of man, this doctrine has been, in the true sense of doctrinal development, we could say that this doctrine has been distilled over the ages into the understanding of the kingship of Christ. We see in the sort of basic philosophical, theological sphere, we have this distinction between the city of God and the city of man. But then in the civil sphere, when we have Christendom actualized, then we have the kingship of Christ as the governing principle that all institutions, including education, would seek first the glory of God. Just like the scriptures tell us, seek first the glory of God and his righteousness, and all things will be added unto you. We have that completely reversed in our society. So maybe let's jump into, because you mentioned the Greek myths. We homeschool. I'm a big fan of good Catholic schools. In fact, part of my promises as being in the Third Order, I'm supposed to help, if I can, support good Catholic schools. We just live a little too far away from a good one to send our kids. So we use a method called the Charlotte Mason method. Some people think it's because she was Anglican, there's something wrong with it. Really, it's just an idea where you use whole books written by one author, and the books have to be old, and you go through sort of the progression of the thinker's whole corpus on a particular subject to give the children a whole education. And so my wife reads our kids along with catechism and so forth, but a lot of Hawthorne's distillations of the Greek myths and so forth. So what you mentioned about Greek myths is very, very important. So let's get into antiquity then. So the church baptizes what is good. St. Basil the Great basically said we take what is good and we leave what is bad. Much is good in the ancient world. Where do we see the roots of truly understanding the education of the full person?
Yeah, you find it in the Greeks in its nascent form, certainly with the cultivation of virtue. The ancient pagans, they understood what a human person was. as opposed to modern pagans who have a completely false definition of what a human person is. So I think you have to begin in education with what is reality, what is nature, what is the nature of a human person. These are utterly vital and utterly lost today. Charlotte Mason knows what a person is. I think as long as you're doing something that is not modern, that has been utterly distorted in materialism, then you're going to be in good shape. Because especially because in a family like yours, you're going to do what the family culture does in the tradition of the church. And I think that's absolutely vital. But the ancients, oh my gosh, with unaided the nature of man, about very other important things. So that's where I would begin with that.
Yeah, and there was just a tiny lag there for about 10 seconds after you said, and the ancients. Do you want to repeat that just in case the viewers missed it? Just your last thought there.
Yeah, I was saying that the ancients, by unaided reason, were able to encounter really profound realities about the nature of man. That the tripartite soul from Plato, that man has an intellect, a free will, and appetites that need to be put in the right order. These are vital things in an authentic education. And as Basil says, be like the honeybee. Take what is good, leave what is bad. That's easy, but we should never leave the ancient Greeks or Romans behind.
Now, you just mentioned Platonic tripartite. Are you also a fan of some of the works of Wolfgang Smith?
I don't know Wolfgang Smith. Who's
Okay.
that?
So he's wonderful. He's still alive. I think he's almost 95. He's one of those men who you don't even think he's real because his resume is too absurd. He had like 2 degrees by the time he was 18 from Cornell. And he was an expert in mathematics. He's a very faithful Catholic, but he's written a lot on the sort of Platonic metaphysics, sort of trying to take back what was stolen by the Gnostics and so forth, and showing, because really the first 1,000 years or so of the church's intellectual tradition was very Platonic. Obviously, Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, for sure, indispensable, and we have the most love possible for Aquinas over here. But Aquinas was formed in that tradition, so there's got to be something there. And anyway, you might like checking him up. He talks about the tripartite cosmology of Plato, and how in the sort of cosmological sphere, a rejection of that cosmology is reflected in a rejection of the true understanding of the nature of man, because, you know, God gives us, we have the eternal law and we have the natural law, and there's not going to be any arbitrary separation. They're going to be in concordance with one another. And so anyway, we see this disorder all over the place, but you're correct. When we don't understand the nature of man, we're going to completely just reject all the reality that we must understand. So, okay, so the ancients understand that man is a composite of body and soul, mind, body, and soul, or body, soul, and spirit, or whatever distinctions you want to use. So let's talk about fundamentals then. What is fundamental in educating your children, or if you're a grown-up and you need to re-educate yourself, like so many of us do? What's fundamental? What should you start with in order to be able to not just have a certification? You know, Chesterton said, public education has not created an educated public. So you want to actually learn real wisdom. Where do you start?
I think the first beginning is the most uncomfortable part, is where you take a look inward and you get a true look at yourself in terms of somebody who's been deformed by the world through your own acquiescence. This is the hardest thing, is people, you ask people everywhere, did you get a good education? And everyone says, yes, I did, without any inkling of what an education is. The reality is this: I went through University of California, Santa Barbara, got a degree in history. The whole thing's fraudulent. If I look back, look at what I did not learn, it was so substantial, it's unbelievable. So I really think it's hard for people just to say this: listen, I am not well formed. I'm not well educated. And that would be absurd to say if you are well educated, but most of us don't know the difference. So it brings to mind Plato's allegory of the cave. If we read Allegory of the Cave and we discover that we're all chained up in the bottom of it, most people today read that story from the point of view of someone outside the cave, when in reality, we are all chained up down there at the bottom. I think that first initial self-indictment is the absolute key to beginning to opening your eyes and saying, I'm not the knower. I'm not the truth teller. I'm the recipient of things, and I need to find true teachers. We've been taught to be our own priests, prophets, and kings. We've been taught to be our own teachers, and this is a nightmare. This is an utter nightmare of subjectivism, narcissism, and all these other terrible things. So I think the place to begin is saying, I'm not well formed and I want to be. That's a great place to start.
Yeah, I'm so happy you mentioned the allegory of the cave. You've taught for a long time. You have certain classes, whether it's high school or elementary school, and you go, that cohort was magical. There was just something about that 25 students. I was so blessed my first year teaching high school. I had a grade 12 class, and I was teaching French immersion. So I was a French teacher, but in the Ontario system, the Catholic schools have French immersion if they want, and religion is taught in French. So I was teaching in French, but I was teaching religion. And it was grade 12, and these kids were good kids. I mean, they're just regular kids. It's not their fault. They're formed by, Marxist ideas. They're just raised. And but they had goodwill. They were all friends because they kind of went through the same French immersion program since like grade 1. So they were all really close, which was great because they were able to kind of open up and we could have great conversations. But I started with the allegory of the cave. And I remember watching them. It's like that GIF online where the guy goes like this, and his mind is blown. Like the whole semester for the 5 months, every day it was like, Mr. Hall, the allegory of the cave, or something would happen. They'd be like, he's in the cave, but that was primary. I don't think if I had not have brought that up to them, I don't think they would have been able to receive the formation in the Catholic religion for the other 4 or 5 months, because I think they would have had a mental block. So for those who aren't fully aware of the allegory of the cave, go look it up. You can find 1,000 copies of it online. There's even some good YouTube videos that do it. And essentially, it goes like there are people who are shackled and they're looking at shadows on a wall. And the shadows on the wall are of things, animals or whatever. They're basically marionettes, and the shadows are of the marionettes. And they're being brought back and forth, and they just look at these things their whole life. So, and the light that's shining on these things is a firelight. So there's a double significance here. Is not only is it an imitation, but it's a reflection of a thing that is a imitation from non-natural light. And then eventually he talks about to get out of the cave, it's going to cost you a lot of pain. You haven't moved your neck in 30 years, so it literally hurts to move. You eventually come out, you see the light of day. It's hard to look at. It hurts. You can't look at the light because it's the real light for the first time. And eventually you get used to it. You contemplate the real things, and you basically get to this point where you can contemplate the forms of those things that are eternal. And that's the unchanging truths of reality. So you're bang on with the allegory of the cave.
Yeah, and I do exactly what you do, Kennedy. I always start my year with that. And it's a consistent theme throughout the year. And it's such an eye-opener for the kids. It's also an image of the city of God and the city of man. The city of man is chained up down at the bottom of the cave because they judge by appearances. Up at the top, when you judge by the light of reason and truth, you have entered the city of God in a sense. So it's a really good allegory for that image as well. And I always start there. And it's always an eye-opener. But tell me this, I've noticed that when I teach this in 6th grade, the transition is so rapid to humility and openness to truth. But every successive year gets a little bit more difficult until you get to college graduates. And then it's a real chore. And then you get to adults with that are already really formed. And it's really tough. It's almost impossible to help someone intellectually convert to this reality of our deformation.
Well, that's what happens in the allegory. There's the one individual who at a certain point decides to go through the great pain, because it's very painful, the great pain to get out. And then after he's, not in the Gnostic sense, but been enlightened, he's seen the truth. He wants to go back into the cave to save everybody. And then when he goes back in, they basically kill him because they say he's crazy. And it's very morbid, but it's one of those sort of, proto-prophecies of the Christian or of Christ, of being set free from your shackles, contemplating the eternal truth, seeing the truth and so forth, and then wanting to go tell everybody about it. And then they make a Saint Stephen out of you and you're martyred. It's a story as old as time. And okay, so we're on this track of the ancients. So obviously we should probably talk about Socrates. And I had the pleasure of reading my education. My education was a mixed bag. I think my specialization was in languages, Spanish and French and Italian. And because it was in those languages, I did. I mean, I graduated in, I don't know, 2010 or 2011 or 2012, something, whatever the year was. It was before woke became a thing, although obviously it's always been there in some ways. But I was able to avoid a lot of that because of the nature of the subject matter. It was a lot of old stuff just because it was like literature of Spain and France and things like that. So there was definitely some, like I had to read Voltaire and I had to read Camus and I had to read Sartre, which is like, it's like, here's a curriculum of how to be depressed, for goodness sake. But I also got to read medieval stuff and stuff. So I kind of got a decent panoply of things. But in one course, it was the philosophy of education. And we read the Meno. And it was where I was first introduced to Socrates' dialogues with the Pharisees, same thing, but with the sophists. So let's go on that topic for a second. So we have Socrates, who's the wisest man because he didn't think he was smart, right? That's kind of the key. And then we have the sophists, who are basically like the Pharisees of the New Testament, and they themselves they're sophistical. They cheat with words in order to win arguments, but there's no substance to them. So let's maybe you can distinguish for us the true wisdom and the Socratic understanding versus the sophistical wisdom that is so common today, even in the church.
Absolutely. This is one of my main themes as well. When you think about what Socrates did, being the wisest man and not knowing it is a reflection of that humility that says, when I do encounter wisdom, what I realize is that there's a bottomless depths of wisdom to be known, and we don't know it. So that humility causes him to go out and test and say, hey, if I'm the wisest man in the world, let me make sure. And he talks to people, asks them questions. And what he uncovers is his own lifelong struggle, Plato's lifelong struggle, and Aristotle's lifelong struggle, which we call the philosophers against the sophists. And a definition of a sophist is one who makes the worst argument the better. It's literally an inverted worldview, another image of the city of man and the city of God. It's the city of man where man puts himself above the truth. There's this great Chesterton quote. He says, there was a time when men believed in the truth and doubted themselves. Now men believe in themselves and doubt the truth. And that's another great image of one who is philosophical, like me and you, Kennedy, and seeking after truth and wisdom is radically opposite from the other one who's justifying his own opinions or justifying a wrong to make it into a right. Literally from Isaiah 5. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, or black white and white black, put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. This is the essence of the difference between a philosopher and a sophist. And I would absolutely demand of my students and myself, not that we're philosophers, but that we're philosophical, that we make our end truth. Absolutely vital.
Yeah, and one of the ways you can recognize, well, again, we see the seeds for the Thomistic tradition in the church, because what Socrates is doing is he has his arguments. He thinks they're correct. Obviously, we all think our argument's correct, otherwise we wouldn't say anything. That's nothing. It's not prideful. It's just we have to have something to say. So he says, okay, I think my argument's correct. I'm going to go talk to people who think I'm wrong. And then I'm just going to ask questions. And it's so funny to read his dialogues with the sophists. He's literally just asking them questions. And if you think about all the things that have happened to us, and I think we can basically talk about this stuff on YouTube now, but let's talk about the COVID thing for just half a second here. The reason why I never bought the hype, and I know there's debatable opinions, but one of the reasons why from day one, I said to myself, this is just not right. I mean, again, I don't know, maybe there's a sickness, maybe there's not, whatever. The point is, the way they're talking about this makes no bloody sense, because I could ask 5 or 6 more questions that they're not answering. And those 5 or 6 questions are going to give us the conclusion of what we're supposed to do about this, because we can't just say, there's a serious illness, therefore we must lock down. It's like, well, hold on a sec. Did you consider not locking down? It's like, well, it's too dangerous. Well, that's not an argument, because you're not allowing it to even be tested at all. And we could go on and on with a million things in our society that are like that today. And what you would see with the sophists is that they just always result to some sort of phraseology. They resort to sloganeering, platitudes, truisms. And I don't think people realize in the world of non-Catholic spiritualities, even in Protestantism, I have a lot of Protestants on Twitter, and they'll post these quotes and stuff from these famous pastors. And I'm like, this is just Hallmark cards. These are just, that's a nice thing you said, but like, I could debunk that in 2 seconds. I like Jesus, so I'm happy you said that, but that's not really an argument. And you see this, it's really this lack of think the thing through until you've thought the whole thing through. And even if you just do that yourself, maybe you're like me, when I walk the dog, I walk the dog every night around 10 o'clock. And thankfully, we have these little earbuds now or whatever, so I can put it in my ear. So if I'm talking to myself, people might think I'm on the phone instead of just thinking I'm crazy. But I just think through things and I talk those things out to myself and I'll catch myself. I'll go, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Okay, we're done. Next point kind of thing. And but sophism is everything today. Maybe you can give us some examples of how this is in education. It's all sophistry, just the basis of what we're teaching our kids and how to learn towards sophistry. Maybe you can give us some insight.
Oh, I'm 100% with you. And I did notice that most faithful Catholics saw through the pandemic in an instant. We didn't fall for the masking, the lockdowns, or the whatever they're called, the vaccines. I don't even know if they're vaccines. We didn't do any of that. And it's interesting because the entire movement was sophistical. And now that we're seeing all the bad manifestations of it, the institutions are still lying. There's no acknowledgement of it. It's just incredible. But you've got to look at politics, which is totally sophistical. The pandemic, which through scientism, it became sort of an ideology and religion of science. Fauci saying, if you don't believe me, you're distrusting the science. I believe in science. This kind of mantra is super sophistical. But in politics, in medical, the public schools are the worst sophistical institution in the history of the world. And Abraham Lincoln said, what happens in the schoolroom in one generation becomes the politics of that generation in the next, a society in the next. And that's borne out perfectly. We are insane now compared to even 20 years ago and 20 years before that. Those generations passing bear out the fact that the entire endeavor is sophistical. I say this, and I said it 10 years ago, and it was absolutely rejected. Today, it might be believed. There is no baby to throw out with the bathwater, theoretically, in modern education. There's nothing to plunder from the Egyptians. If there was anything good in public education, they plundered it from us in the first place. So theoretically, it's all sophistry. I could prove that to you if we have a couple years.
Well, yeah, we could. We'll talk for 2 years. No, it's cooked. Like public education is cooked. There's nothing left. Now, there are certain technical skills. Obviously, this is why you find if someone is really math oriented and they kind of keep their nose clean and they go through a STEM field or something like that, they'll usually be a pretty reasonable person as far as publicly educated individuals are. Now, they could be a materialist and have major issues that way. But it's funny. One of the things I'm really into is weightlifting, hence all the paraphernalia behind me. And so I'll listen to these podcasts of these guys who are bodybuilders and trainers and so forth. And they may be completely godless. Some of them are. And I, switch the show because it's like, I'm not going to listen to that. But some of them, but when they're asked questions about life, they actually usually have pretty decent kind of wise answers because their whole world is dealing with its material reality, but they at least believe it's real. And they deal with things that are testable, things that can be proven, things that can be repeated, things that can be argued, and they're concerned with results, which kind of gives them a certain amount of common sense. But in the world of public education, if you're not one of those STEM people, and it's funny, we always joke about how today you can go to university and you get a degree in lesbian dance theory or something. One time I was sitting at a wedding. It was a friend of a friend kind of wedding thing. And there was a lady sitting beside me, very nice woman. But we started talking. What do you do? I'm a teacher. Oh, that's nice. And what do you do? And she was doing her PhD, a doctorate. That used to mean something. Remember, C.S. Lewis only had a degree. He didn't even have a PhD. So think about how important a PhD is supposed to be historically. Now, his was from Oxford, so that's a little bit different. But nonetheless, she was doing her doctorate. She was going to be Dr. So-and-so. That's supposed to mean something. Oh, what's your doctorate in? Well, it's in psychology. Oh, that's interesting. What's the specialization? It's a specialization of feminist comedy. Now, this was not rinky-dink community university, whatever. This was Queen's University. For those who don't know, who are outside of the Canadian context, we don't have an Ivy League per se, but like England, we have 3 or 4 schools like the Oxfords, the Cambridges. They're historic and they're internationally known. Elon Musk went to Queen's University. He's actually Canadian through his mother. She's a Canadian. She is Canadian. He's actually a Canadian citizen by birth, I guess, or birthright. But he went to Queen's, McGill, the business school at Western, the Ivy School of Business. Nothing to do with Ivy League in the States. A different Ivy. Simon Fraser. There's 5 or 6 schools in Canada where international students are picking between those and Harvard and Yale. They're that good. So she's getting her PhD from this kind of school, and it's a psychology doctorate in feminist comedy. When you are at the point where you can be a doctor in feminist comedy, that education is, that piece of paper that person gets is worth less than the toilet paper that you buy at the supermarket.
That's right.
I don't even
know.
Bad. What do you even say to that? A feminist comedy. It's like, what I asked what your research was. Well, I go to comedy shows. Like, what are we even doing here? So
the only comedy is PhD,
Well, yeah, the only comedy PhD. So how do we get here though? How do we get to the point? Because I mean, it's not the case that educating the public is bad. If you look in the, I don't know if it's in every edition of the Council of Trent Catechism, but the one I have is from 10. I think it is because it's like a reprint. But it goes over, because it's written at the time of obviously the Protestant Reformation. So it's kind of refuting the myths. And one of the myths was, the Catholics were never catechizing and teaching them the Bible. And it's a list of all of these things of, here's a bishop in the year 600 saying the parish needs to set up a school for free for the public. So educating the public has always been a part of the church's mandate. But what happened to public education qua public education, where it's now a complete dumpster fire?
Right. I have a lot of answers for that. I think it's hundreds and hundreds of years old, the original problem. I mean, the original problem is in the garden with the serpent and convincing truth. But if we go to about the 10th or 11th century, we see the development of nominalism. So the real thing becomes about first rejecting authority, which leads to a rejection of nature. And if we take Aristotle's 4 causes, what we discover about today is that these early rejections of authority and nature have led to a rejection of final causality, real purposes and natural purposes to things, and a rejection of nature, which is formal cause, and discovering that things have universal essences. When we reject those 2 immaterial but profound metaphysical realities, we reject everything we need to even define the word education properly. So I'm with you. It's so true. Vocational training and education or engineering and STEM things, those aren't even part of a proper education if we understand what the word education means. Education in its truest sense is simply the acquisition of the intellectual moral virtues delivered by the true liberal arts, trivium, quadrivium, and the freeing sciences of philosophy and theology. That's it, because that perfects a human person. The practical arts, which are absolutely vital, are training, and they're good things. And you're so right. I wanted to add one thing to what you said, Kennedy. It's true that good families mitigate and protect children from the vile emptiness, the dumpster fire of modern education. It just mitigates. And then one step further removed is if they really get engaged in material mathematics, material engineering, and even the material sciences, you can get by a lot less scathed than if you go into lesbian dance or feminist comedy, which is a paradox or an oxymoron or just a major contradiction. So I'm 100% with you, but I think we reject those 2 vital causes to our great peril. And I challenge teachers today. Tell me what the word education means. And I don't meet teachers often that have any clue at all.
Yeah. It I speak Italian, so if you said somebody had bad manners, you'd say lui è maleducato. He's not educated. There's the traditional understanding, the way it's colloquially understood is you know how to live, you know how to act. And I want to go on this nominalism train for a second here. I just submitted a manuscript to Sophia for a book on modernism, and God help me, I had to read Kant and Hegel and Descartes and Hume, and I think I'm okay. I think I survived.
You okay?
I'm okay. It's funny. There's an anecdote. A priest of ours, he was telling a story how his one of his professors at the seminary. It's a traditional seminary, and one of the students they have in the seminary what's called a hell section. So for their books where they're there for study, it's Protestantism and false religions and so forth. And you have to have permission because obviously these ideas can be corrupting, and they want them to be formed in the faith before they're looking into strange fire. But one of the students one of the seminarians had a great intellectual acumen, and he wanted to study these things to understand the errors of modern philosophy. So he had permission to go read some Kant and stuff like that. And he's talking to his spiritual director, and he said, I think this stuff is starting to affect me. Like, I've got all these questions about existence and stuff now, and it's like St. Thomas is harder to understand. And the remedy from the spiritual director was not, okay, you have to go read the Summa. It was, you are required to go outside and play basketball for an hour every day. And I thought that was so hilarious because the answer was, you have to get out of the absurdity and you have to go into reality and you have to stop thinking and you have to go do something basically human and just get fresh air. And this goes back to what you were saying, how the way the schools are, the children go into a coma because it's an anti-human education. It's against what it does is it completely deforms the intellect of these kids to the point where not only are they not able to understand the catechism, but they can't even understand reality. They can't understand themselves. And this is why we have, for example, the transgenderism stuff. I mean, you would think if you were to talk to somebody from 200 years ago and say, in 200 years, there's going to be people who they go surgically remove their genitalia and they call themselves a different gender. They'd be like, first of all, what's gender? Second of all, are these people in an insane asylum? And would say, no, there's a whole philosophy around it. But this goes back to what you were saying, William of Ockham with nominalism. It's a misunderstanding of Aristotle, and it's a denial of the essences and the nature, the unchanging reality of things. So for example, I have a pen right here. Okay. This is a pen. And I know it's a pen because not just because it looks like a pen, but because the person who made it conceived of it as a pen, made plans for it to be a pen, and it was constructed as a pen. The final cause was the first. He saw the pen in his mind, and then he said, I'm going to make this, and then he had the sufficient causes and so forth to make it actually happen. Today, they will say, well, that's a pen for you, but if you use it to stab somebody, it's actually a weapon. It's like, well, no, it's still a pen, but somebody's using it against its nature. And this sort of thing, if you can't understand this, then you're lost.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's worse than that. Unfortunately, when you reject natures and purposes, that affects material and efficient cause as well, because all things begin with prime matter. And that composite form of determinate form imposed on prime matter makes things the kinds of things that they are. Without essence and final cause, material changes. And so does efficient causality. When you have just material causes and you don't understand that spirit determines and matter's potential, they've inverted that and made matter determinative and spirit potential. That is a radical and irrevocable error. So it's much worse than we can say on this show.
Well, and that is, again, for people to go read Augustine. It's either book 10 or 11. I just narrated, last year, but I narrated Anthony Esselin's recent translation of Confessions. It's a very good confession for 10 books. It's a very good translation.
Wonderful.
But it's book 10 or 11, and you know how Augustine is. Augustine, it's almost comical because he's got, 6,000 words, and he's got through 3 words of the first sentence of Genesis.
Yes.
And but he's trying to understand. In the beginning, God. Okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he knows, okay, God's outside time. But at this sort of timeless moment, he creates. And then there's this prime matter. And he goes through the understanding of this. And it's extremely important to understand. It's masterful what Augustine does. Obviously, he was amazing. But if you don't understand this, then yeah, you're just going to be done. And the error is fundamental. And I just gave a speech in London, England, at a Chesterton conference a month ago, really. And it was wonderful. I mean, we're in London, England. It's Chestertonians. It's like, come on, that's like my dream. And And part of the speech, I talked about, because I was talking about his book Orthodoxy, and part of the speech was Chesterton he was so adamant about the fairy tales, the fairy stories, and the folk tales. And the reason is because before the cathedral exists in physical form, it's fully completed in a dream. You know, before the poet writes the song, he's already in love. You know, the metaphysical is actually first. It's not second. The metaphysical is first. This is why we hear in the scriptures, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made God, and the Word was with God, etc. And this is something that is, anyway, it's lost. So we have about 15, 20 minutes left. Got to cap it around an hour. We could talk for 5 hours and come back on my show anytime you want. I know you've got a busy schedule. Just send me an email and just say, hey, I want to talk about this. Sounds good. I love it.
Great.
So I heard you on a show once, because this is something I think will be strange for people, because the church has always made it very clear through her wisdom that it's most important to begin with theology, hence the catechism. People forget that theology is the queen of the sciences, meaning you can have exactitude in theology. It's a science. Okay, hence why we have doctrines that are, you have to believe them, or anathema. It's not just a feeling. But you said on one show one time, if your kids are in public school and you don't know what to do, but you know you can take them out, just take them out, sit on your couch, and read them the Chronicles of Narnia. Why did you say that?
I said even worse than that. I said, if you just take your kids out of the school and sit and gaze into their eyes and do nothing more, you will do infinitely better than the public schools. And then you add to it, well, read Narnia. That's a great idea. Narnia is so beautiful because it conveys that right order of theological science is the highest. And then proper thinking is that handmaiden to theology. And then real things, because those stories are so much fun and they're just really joyful. But you're so right. Begin with the reality that the highest, freeing, most amazing exactitude science is theology. You can't miss with revealed truth. And then proceed to understand that philosophy, which is the science of the mind, we can make errors, but we can also derive certainty from proper use of acquiring the liberal art of logic and proper grammar. We can really do this, and it's amazing. And recognize that human experience and material science is the lowest form of knowing, and we can't even exact certitude about facts from material science. We can get high probabilities, improbabilities, things like that. But what happens in the public schools, they invert that order and they pretend like we get certainty from the material sciences, and that ruins your life. If you believe in science, like Esqueleto and Nacho Libre, you're in trouble. You're in a lot of trouble. So, and it's much worse than that, because now the public schools, they've been doing this for a long time, but it's out in the open. They're teaching kids grotesque and perverted sexual things. They just are. They're teaching kids, they're literally teaching in a type of illiteracy I call material literacy, but it's worse than that. It's ideological literacy. They politicize literature. They're making math racist. It's unbelievable. There's no theoretical upside to the public school, because anything you do acquire from that, you will have to disentangle or unlearn. That's partly why I say that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And again, if we go back to the COVID era, you know, the fact that people believe that their salvation will come through medication, this is indicative of so many problems. We have always in the church, of course, been very complimentary, and we've heralded the use of the lower sciences in their proper place. The church, you know, what's the classic apologetic we give to people who say the church is a force for evil? No, the church gave us hospitals. No, the church gave us university system. No, look at all these monks and things like that are scientists and stuff. And that's great. But even sometimes in Catholic apologetics, it makes me cringe when that's the thing that we promote to try to prove to people Catholicism is good. And I understand why they're doing it. I get it. Like, they're talking to a skeptical audience. People are materialists. And they're trying to say, look, we're really sciencey too. But instead what we should be saying is, hold on a second. Why the heck do you even have natural sciences? Why is it that you as an atheist can go into a cadaver in your medical school program and you just automatically assume that there's an order of operations to why that body works in a certain way? Why is it that you can go do your mathematics and you can know with mathematical certainty, the highest form of sort of metaphysical certainty, why is it that you can go into those subjects and know that the order of operations, the bed mass, the brackets, exponents, whatever, I remember my grade 6 math, if you go through that, why is it that that always works, and you know that in all universes and all potential multiverse, whatever you make up, you know that it's always going to work? Why is that always going to work? It's because there's an eternal law. And if you want to, and it stands to reason, if you want to understand these things better, then you should understand the underpinnings, the thing that makes that thing possible. And if we look at our great saints, St. Albert the Great, who was a teacher, the teacher of St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Albert the Great we say the word scientist, etc. The point is, he was a man who was heralded as the mind of his age in all of the disciplines outside of theology. And why is that possible? Because he understood the way God worked. He understood the way that nature worked. So therefore, he could understand how all of those things lower on the scale of hierarchy could work. So let's talk practicalities for a second. So maybe there's some people listening to this and they know, okay, I got to get my kids out of the schools, whatever. And it's tough. I get it. It's tough. You know, you got whatever. We live in an anti-human economy. So obviously there's economic concerns and that's a whole other conversation for another day. But you got to try to find a way to get out. So one of the biggest hurdles for people to get their kids, if they can't get them into a good school, a good traditional Catholic school, if they can't get them into a good school, they're nervous about education because they think, oh, I have to recreate school in my living room. Maybe you could speak to why that's not the case and why they got to sort of unschool themselves from that mentality.
Absolutely. So key. I tell parents this all the time. If you go home and do to your children what the public schools do to them, that's a crime. It's still better than having the public schools do it because your children won't take you as seriously, which will be good. But you've got to disentangle everything you've learned. And like I said, honestly, if you sit home and do nothing with them, you're in good shape. But I think you can look into very simple things like just reading good stories with them is enough to get them out of the public schools. But there's so much more than that. There's new things. I just encountered this some website that said the 7 liberal arts, and you can start to learn about what these things are. And here's what I promise you. If you're home alone and you've never had a teacher education course, you're going to be a lot better off for your children than anybody with a master's degree in education or a doctorate. Those people will ruin your lives. So it's a myth that people think, well, I'm not teacher trained. I don't know how to do it. You don't know not how to do it unless you've been teacher trained, because they will invert the order of reality. So you might do it poorly, but I promise it's worth it to do that poorly than to allow the public schools to do well what they do.
Well, yeah, and sure. I can speak to, because my wife is the primary educator of our kids because I'm obviously working, but I'm the one with the quote unquote education degree, bachelor's of education from Althouse College, whatever. And I spent right. $15,000 to get it. And, but my wife is teaching our kids, and my wife, she was in, she's a full-time homemaker now, but she was in cosmetics. She was actually quite a good makeup artist. She did weddings and all that sort of stuff. She's very artistic. And so she had no formal education in education. She didn't do some highfalutin degree or anything like that. But my wife talks about how homeschooling the kids and reading with them the great books, the old books. The program we use, it has this word living books. And basically they're supposed to be at least 100 years old. If you need something on history, because, Canada's only 160 years old. So, okay, some of the history books are going to be a little younger than that. But it's like they approve, okay, this was written by an author who had that style about him. So this book is fine. And, these great books. And for her, it's been the greatest thing ever. I mean, she'll sit there reading them some wonderful old story or she loves to read them the Burgess books on nature, the Burgess animal books and things like that. And they learn about the animals and so forth using the Peter Rabbit characters. It's all true information about the animals, but she She'll come to me after a homeschooling session and be like, my goodness gracious, I just learned the greatest thing today. So not only is it amazing for the children, but it's so amazing for the parents. It's such an amazing process to go through with your kids, where not only are they learning, but you're learning with them. And there's no problem in that. You don't have to feel like, oh, I'm not qualified. You just have to stay 2 pages ahead of your kids. I mean, they're 6 years old. I think you'll be okay. You'll be okay if you say, oh, we'll answer that question tomorrow. Then you go look it up and you answer it tomorrow and stuff. And anyway, I just think one of the ways to sell good education to parents is to say, no, this is actually going to help you save your soul as well.
Absolutely. And there's no reason why parents can't learn right along with that kindergartner. It really requires the highest thing to be love. You say, I love my child so much that I'm willing to give up everything to make sure he's not being deformed by society right now. That's where it begins. And then along with them, I got my education when I started teaching 3rd grade, and then went to 4th into 6th into high school. And I learned, I mean, I am the guy who learned the most in the last 30 years from every class I've ever been in. And I think we should all be like that as teachers. And C.S. Lewis says this: if you're reading something with your 5-year-old that you wouldn't read with more enjoyment than when you're 50, you're reading the wrong stuff. And I think that's really, really important and true to get, is that if you're doing something super boring with your kids, you're on the wrong track.
Okay. We've got a few minutes left. So first, before I ask you a couple final questions, just for fun, you have a YouTube channel, correct?
Yes.
And what's that called so we can show the audience?
I think it's called City of Truth 9808, and I can send you a link to it.
I'm just gonna pull it up here. City of Truth, because I've watched your videos before, so it should come up. City of Truth. Let's see. There we go. I'll pull this up on the screen. Here is Stephen's YouTube channel. You can see that on the screen here, ladies and gentlemen. City of Truth.
There it is. And
really good stuff. I mean, it's kind of like I appreciate your work on Mr. Lofton, by the way. But this channel does not get enough traffic, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not that smart. Mr. Jonathan's smarter than I am. Go to City of Truth and get him some more views. There's some great stuff. It's do you use a teleprompter when you do your stuff?
No, but I do put some words behind my camera so I can remember what I'm supposed to say.
Okay, yeah, because it's basically like essays. It's like essays. It's really great, really good stuff, and it's from a classical perspective. So go check that out. Okay, and then last couple questions, just for fun. So obviously you love C.S. Lewis, you love Chesterton, and so forth. What is your favorite C.S. Lewis book?
Oh, that's really an unfair question. When it comes to education, The Abolition of Man knocks it out of the park. When it comes to disentangling vice from your soul, I love The Great Divorce. I think that's amazing. Who doesn't love mere Christianity? It's just that when I was coming to the church, it's a bare bones, get your feet wet with the faith. I love that. And I love all his essays. He's got a bunch of really great essays on education, The Lilies That Fester, The Parthenon and the Optative, absolutely key. So unfair question. What's your favorite C.S. Lewis book?
So I would say, as far as like nonfiction, it would be The Abolition of Man. So Men Without Chests and The Weight of Glory, like that sort of collection there. Yeah, that's a given. And then I would say, though, from his fiction, we do listen to, we actually have the audio drama of Narnia made by the Augustine Institute, or the Family, whatever it is, Family Foundation, or Voice of the Family. Or no, it's not that. Whatever it is, it's amazing. Paul McCusker made it. It's amazing. We live out in the country, so we drive like 40 minutes to go anywhere. So we listen to a lot of audiobooks. But personally, his space trilogy, I love. Okay. I love it, and I've read that book through twice. And go read that series, ladies and gentlemen. The 3rd book is essentially a prophecy of COVID, and you're gonna go, oh my goodness, he saw this thing coming. And Till We Have Faces, his retelling of a Greek myth. It's absolutely wonderful. It's a lesser known one, and it's very, very special. Okay, what's your favorite Chesterton book?
Oh my goodness. It's got to be Orthodoxy, but what's wrong with the world? Heresies. There's so many good ones. I love Chesterton so much. I even love the Father Brown books. I think those are fantastic. Great for the kids. I read those with my girls, and We did those same Narnias with our children. And I just want to tell you that. But Chesterton, too much there, right? There's way too many things.
Yeah,
what's your favorite Chesterton?
The Everlasting Man. Orthodoxy. Okay. Orthodoxy it's not like a second place. It's 1A and 1B. It's very close. If like Everlasting Man is 150 out of 100. Orthodoxy is like 149 out of 100 in my opinion. So I love The Everlasting Man. That book was one of those paradigm shifting books that changed my life. And then I actually have his Father Brown series on my bedside table right now. I'm reading through the collected work, so I love those as well. When you're in entertainment, you have technical difficulties, you embrace them. You don't pretend they don't happen because people think it's awkward. So we ladies and gentlemen, we just lost connection for a couple minutes. So we were just finishing with our favorite books. Now, the one question I asked before you lost connection was, is there anywhere else where we can find your stuff? And you do have a newsletter. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, it's City of Truth. For the last 3 years, I've had kind of just a weekly newsletter where I've been putting out a weekly notice about roadblocks, things that stand between us and disentangling all these disordered principles that we've been taught, sort of by osmosis. So every week I put out this newsletter. It's free. You can sign up for it. I sent you the link so you can put it on there, and you can read it. And there it is. Yeah. So yeah, just sign up and you'll get a weekly email. And I put in a couple saints quotes and a great villain quote and a great teacher quote and just some ideas. And I always answer an audience question. So it's the list is building up and people have questions. And if you have questions, you can ask me anything about education. I will be happy to try to answer it. It's never simple these days because we've been so deformed. It's just such a benighted age and we're confused by the bright lights of technology and progress. Sometimes it's really hard to see how dark things really are intellectually and morally.
Yes, that's great. You're exactly correct. We are simpatico, my friend. I do hope that we can do some more stuff on my Substack. I'm doing, for my YouTube members, I'm doing a book study on They've Uncrowned Him by Archbishop Lefebvre, and it's about really just liberalism, and it goes through all these errors and things, and I love that stuff. YouTube is fun. I'm happy, ladies and gentlemen, that you're watching, but I always say this: I really wish everyone in the church and society could just get their act together and I could just go teach at a nice Catholic school again. That's all I ever wanted to do. And I kind of fell into this because it was just, I had to do something, and this is like teaching, I guess. Yeah, Catholic education is important. So on my channel, on my Substack and for my members, I try to do basically lectures, for some reason, people are gluttons for punishment and they like listening to me talk. I cannot understand why. But for those souls out there trying to skip out on time in purgatory, they suffer through me talking about old books for them and things. So that's something I'm doing. So yeah, definitely maybe in the future we can collaborate on something or something like that, because I think there's a lot of people who have a lot of reservations and problems with education, and they really don't know what to do. And having someone like yourself with 33 years of experience is really important. We just lost him.
Yeah.
There you go.
If I can add. You're a gifted speaker, and I love your thinking. And it's funny because you and I share a mind and a heart on all these things. And I'm absolutely dwelling on liberalism as we speak. So, yeah, I would love to collaborate with you, and maybe we can meet more if there are specific questions or things we can address. I'd be very happy to work with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I paid him to say that. He's a good employee. All right. All right, Stephen, it's been wonderful. We got to stop with the bromance, and we've got to sign off here. Yeah. So again, ladies and gentlemen, check out City of Truth. I'll put the link in the description area for the email newsletter and so forth. And we'll be back on again at some point. So thanks for coming on.
Awesome. God bless you, Kenny. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer the Kennedy Report. I didn't like that name. It was given to me when I was doing newsy stuff. I don't like the news. So now it's called Mere Tradition. You'll get used to it. So this has been another installment of Mere Tradition, and we will talk to you next time.